Hey guys, Jonah here coming at you with another Spireside chat. I've been playing Ascension 20 for, it looks like, coming up to almost 2 months now. I didn't play it too much at first, but I've been getting more and more into it recently. And I wanted to take an opportunity to just look at some winning decks that I have with each of the classes. And not try to classify them as archetypes or anything like that, because I think that's a little bit too simple of a way to look at winning Ascension 20 decks, but talk about which things they're doing very strongly, which allow them to get to the point where they're able to beat this difficulty. So I'm at a point now where I probably have 20 plus wins with each of the classes. I'm winning about half of my runs, I would say, on Ascension 20 at this point. And I feel like I have a decent grasp of most of the things that each class can do to really push over the threshold and actually secure an Ascension 20 win. So let's look at some decks. I'm not sure exactly how long this will take. It's the middle of the night and I can't sleep right now, so I'm not sure if I'm going to ramble and sound unintelligible. Hopefully you'll enjoy the video. Our first deck, and this is my first Ironclad Ascension 20 win. This deck is basically a Kunai plus Shuriken plus Ornamental Fan deck. If you play 3 attacks in a turn with this deck, it starts to scale very rapidly, picking up strength and dexterity, and it has Ornamental Fan, to gain 4 block as well. Kunai was picked up very early in the run, Ornamental Fan was picked up in Act 2, and Shuriken was picked up just a little bit before the final boss fight, so it built off the Kunai pick, basically, to start things out. Also has a self-forming clay, which makes any sort of self-damaging card a lot better, because you lose 1 hit point from your self-damaging card, like your Brutality Plus, for example, and get 3 block out of that on the next turn. So it's obvious, I think, that with all of these ninja relics, something like an Iron Wave Plus is going to be a pretty good card, because this card blocks for you, but it's also an attack, which allows you to proc your ninja relics. I think the less obvious stuff is that anything that draws cards is going to be really good. And so Brutality Plus is very, very good in this deck. Brutality Plus is a card which I absolutely love sometimes and I'm not interested in at all other times. And this is a deck where I really want to play 3 attacks every turn, and so Brutality Plus is a massive, massive boon to the deck. Anything like Pommel Strike or even Shrug It Off, this is a skill, not an attack, but it's allowing me to draw a card. I just want to maximize my chance in a deck like this of pulling off 3 attacks in a turn. And then, just because I had a Kunai and an Ornamental Fan, I didn't have a Shuriken the entire run, so I did need to be able to like scale and deal a bunch of damage early in fights. And for this deck, the way that I did that was I had some spot weaknesses, so that gives me access to a bunch of strength scaling, and then I have a Pummel Plus, which scales off strength. Did I have a Sword Boomerang? I had a Sword Boomerang as well, which scales off strength a little bit. And I also had a Juggernaut. Juggernaut might seem completely out of place in this deck, because it's not an attack. When we're attacking a lot, we're not blocking a lot. But Juggernaut is just a card which deals an enormous amount of damage over the course of a fight after you play it for 2 energy. And that's what this card is functioning for in this deck. It's like in an Act 2 fight, like elite fight or boss fight, or even a hallway fight where the enemies just have like 100 to 200 hit points that I have to chew through. Juggernaut is coming down and making the Iron Waves deal more damage. It's making the Shrug It Off deal a bunch of damage. It's making Brutality plus self-forming clay deal more damage. And anytime we get attacked, of course, if we get attacked like 6 times by a bird, we're getting 3 block 6 different times the next turn. So all of a sudden, Juggernaut is dealing 30 damage after we get attacked 1 times 6 by a bird in an Act 2 hallway fight. So Juggernaut's a very strong card there as well. Shout out to Reaper, helping sustain. Anytime that you have strength scaling with something like Spot Weakness Plus, Reaper's going to be incredible. Alright, so that was just sort of like a very high value sort of deck based off those relics. This deck is very much a 39 card Snecko Eye deck. So Snecko Eye is an incredibly strong relic, possibly the strongest relic in the game, the way that it breaks the way the game is meant to function. All of a sudden, any of your cards which used to cost 3 are costing between 0 and 3. So something like a Bludgeon Plus, 42 damage for 3 energy, suddenly 42 damage for anything from 0 to 3 energy. And then the other half of Snecko Eye, draw 2 additional cards. This is very relevant in Ironclad runs. If you have an Armaments Plus, all of a sudden you have an extra 2 cards in your hand every time for this to upgrade. If you have a Fiendfire Plus, all of a sudden you have 2 extra cards in your hand, so Fiendfire Plus is dealing an extra 20 damage. This card will deal 60 damage to a single target, just in any Snecko Eye hand, when you draw 7 cards and then play a Fiendfire. And of course, Demon Form is excellent scaling, especially when you can play it for less than 3 energy, which you will usually be able to do with Snecko Eye. So, I don't think this deck is incredible, honestly. I think it was possible probably for this deck to die in Act 2. I imagine that Fiendfire Plus helped out a lot. Fiendfire Plus and Battle Trance Plus, and you'll notice very commonly the way that my Ironclad decks are getting enough front-loaded damage to survive Act 2 at Ascension 20 is going to involve Fiendfire or another rare attack. There are some really nice ways for Ironclad to deal a ton of damage all at once. This deck has Sharon's Ashes as well on top of all that, so Fiendfire on top of doing all its single target damage is also exhausting 7 cards at once for 21 AoE exhaust damage. Yeah, picking up Snecko Eye at the end of Act 2 for this deck just makes it sort of over the top. It's an okay deck, but this is one of the weaker decks that I won Ascension 20 with, I would say. Whew. This deck is spicy. So we've got a Dead Branch that we got very late in the run. I don't think we should focus too much on the fact that this has a Dead Branch in it, because we had to get through like the entirety of the run basically before we picked up our Dead Branch. And with Dead Branch it's pretty hard to lose boss fights. You don't need to have Corruption with Dead Branch for it to be ridiculous. This exhausts, this exhausts, this exhausts. This exhausts cards, this guy exhausts, and we're just going to see a bunch of extra cards over the course of boss fight, and some of them are going to be very valuable and let us win. We had a Potion Belt as well, which maybe was full of relics for the boss fights, I don't know. Looks like we took quite a lot of damage against Time Eater and Donu Deka, but eventually won. Oh yeah, and against Donu Deka, they're putting Dazes in your deck, so all of a sudden you're getting an extra, like, 2 free cards on turns, like 5, 6, 7. Oh, we won on turn 4? We won on turn 4? Well, probably probably Dead Branch did something stupid in that fight. This deck does have Runic Pyramid. At the end of your turn, you no longer discard your hand, which can get awkward with Dead Branch, but with Ice Cream as well and a Whirlwind Plus, it lets us store up energy for the appropriate time to Whirlwind. Deck doesn't have a ton of strength scaling, but presumably Dead Branch doesn't know that. Shout out to Mercury Hourglass. 3 damage to all enemies at the start of your turn is an immense amount of damage. Very useful for getting through Act 2. Very relevant in all of the Act 2 elite fights, I would say. Least relevant in the Book of Stabbing fight, but even against the Book of Stabbing, that's like 15 damage. It's like walking into a single target fight with almost an extra fire potion, and then anytime you're fighting an AoE fight, this is absolutely ridiculous and maybe dealing 40 to 50 damage over the course of the fight. Big shout out to 3 times Body Slam as well. So something that this deck can do with Pyramid is it can just draw through its deck, hold onto the Body Slams. It can play Armaments to upgrade all of the Body Slams. It can play like a True Grit. You can go like offering Armaments Plus, True Grit Plus, Shrug It Off Plus, Shrug It Off, Entrench Plus, and get up to like 70 block or something, and then play 3 Body Slams, and that's a very strong thing that the deck is doing as well. Yeah, it's just like a sweet deck with some pretty nice synergies and very strong combos that it can pull off easily with Runic Pyramid. Okay, so we have another Runic Pyramid run here. Picked up a Velvet Choker, so we don't want to go absolutely insane, but basically this deck is able to set up its super strong combo at whatever speed it wants, basically, because it has 5 copies of Apparition to have intangible for the first 5 turns. Pretty sure this deck did not take like any damage. Oh, 35 against Time Eater. Probably had 1 turn where it got hit really hard against Time Eater. I'm surprised that this deck took so long to kill them too. 15 turns, 13 turns. So we have a Juggernaut Plus for a bunch of damage. We've got Feel No Pains for exhausting for a bunch of block. And cards like Apparitions, Exhaust, True Grit Plus is going to exhaust, Havoc Plus is going to exhaust. That's where I see the majority of this deck's damage coming. It's sort of like a very fair exhaust synergy deck. You can have exhaust synergy decks which are absolutely unfair, and we're going to see some of those. This is a somewhat fair one in terms of outputting damage. It's a little bit unfair in terms of defending against damage, because it has the Pyramid to make sure that it always has the cards that it needs in hand against the big attacks. It's got the 5 Apparitions to help set up slowly, and then it has 3 copies of Feel No Pain, which is immense. It does have Entrench plus Body Slam, plus the Pyramid, which is the exact combo we just saw in the previous run. So there is the ability to do something with that, but this deck doesn't even really need to combo off in that way. It just has so much defense that it's going to survive for a pretty lengthy time against most of the bosses. I imagine that comboing off like that was a bigger deal in hallway fights throughout the acts, where like Apparitions kept us alive for a bit. But in some of the hallway fights or elite fights, especially in Act 3, the enemies are actually more aggressively adding debuffs to your deck than the like Act 3 bosses do, and so sitting around for longer in fights is going to be more dangerous. Giant Head in 9 turns, Nemesis in 9 turns, taking 1 damage. The run histories are really good these days. You can see like exactly which cards we took and skipped and stuff. It's awesome. Alright. This is a super sweet self-harm synergy package in this deck. It's a bit of a weird deck. When do we put Rage in the deck? Can I see that now? I think I put Rage in the deck in Act 1, if I remember right. So we got a Carnage early for damage, Shrug It Off, Impervious Armaments, upgraded Carnage and Bash, got a Body Slam. No, I put Rage in the deck. Man, I don't know why Rage is in this deck. Well, for some reason Rage is in this deck, but if you have never seen this before, Brutality Plus hits you for 1 damage at the start of your turn, Combust hits you for 1 damage at the end of your turn. Both of these cards are pretty aggressively costed and valuable in most decks. I wouldn't say that they're incredible in a lot of decks. The self-damage can hurt you quite a bit over the course of a fight and over the course of an act, and the effects are like okay, but they're not insane. They're like good enough to get you there on Ascension 20 with some help, but they're not ridiculous. But we've got a Rupture in this deck as well. Whenever we lose HP from a card, we gain 1 strength. So we're basically making ourselves a bad version of Demon Form. We're losing health from a card twice a turn at the beginning and end of the turn. Rupture is gaining us 2 strength per turn that way. And while our Demon Form is sort of crappy, it only costs us 1 energy to put Rupture in play. Brutality costs 0, Combust costs 1, and this combination of cards is drawing us an extra card a turn and dealing 7 AoE damage to all enemies every turn. So it's a less committal way to get the sort of strength scaling that you get off Demon Form into play. It doesn't require you to spend an entire turn spending all of your energy to play a Demon Form, which doesn't do anything at first. It's much less impactful to the way that your fight plays out. Yeah, we got a Carnage for early damage. It's really important to see that in every single one of these runs, I'm going to be like prioritizing a very early damage card. I'm probably going to be upgrading Bash and the damage card pretty usually. So upgrade Bash at floor 6, upgrade Carnage at floor 8. And that's how I'm getting set up to fight some elites. 1 elite, 2 elite, 3 elites over the course of the rest of Act 1. This deck looks like it had a lot of trouble blocking, which I imagine may be why Rage ended up in it. We do have an Incense Burner for gaining 1 intangible every 6 turns, but we don't have like Apparitions, we don't have a ton of Feel No Pains. I imagine that we took quite a lot of damage from the boss fights. Oh, but we went in with 127 hit points, thanks to Singing Bowl raising our max HP by 2 over and over again. There's no feed in the deck. Singing Bowl's a very, very strong relic. combined presumably with max HP from some other events. We also have a Pandora's Box, which is not the best Act 1 boss relic, but it does take all of the defends and strikes out of the deck, which makes way for more powerful cards. And we have 3 copies of Body Slam, which are generally like the most breakable Ironclad attack, I would say, Body Slam. If you can work out some way to make a bunch of block, which it looks like we weren't even that good at in this deck. Yeah, we took 120 damage over the course of the 2 Act 3 boss fights with this deck, so it just wasn't that good at blocking, but it had enough max HP that it got there. Okay, this was a pretty memey Ironclad win. This is like the speedrunner deck, except built for Ascension 20, so it has a ton of cards to be resilient and stuff like that. We didn't just take all the cards out of our deck and assume that we were going to get this combo, but getting Necronomicon, first attack played each turn that costs 2 or more is played twice. Getting that plus 1 energy, 2 energy, plus 2 copies of Whirlwind. So this deals 80 damage to all enemies if I play it as the first card of my turn. So that deals with like every fight in the game for the most part. This deck has 2 copies of Reaper Plus in it as well. This gets played twice. So even without any strength gain, that would be healing for 10 for each enemy that it hit. And this deck does have a little bit of strength scaling, it looks like. It has a Shuriken, which is going to proc an awful lot actually with Necronomicon, because any 2 cost attack that we play counts as 2 attacks played. And it does have an Inflame. In terms of blocking, the deck's got an Ornamental Fan, it has a Fossilized Helix to prevent the first time we would lose HP in every combat. It has a Meat on the Bone, so if we take a bunch of damage we're going to heal back up. And it does have 2 copies of Feel No Pain with some exhaust in here, 3 copies of True Grit Plus, 3 copies of Warcry Plus, a Havoc Plus, the 2 Reaper Pluses. Yeah, this deck's ridiculous. I think yeah. Did we get Wing Boots? Oh, I remember this run. We got Wing Boots, so we were able to fight 4 elites at the end of the Act 3. 0 damage against Nemesis, 0 damage against Orb Walkers, 0 damage against Giant Heads, 0 damage against Orb Walkers. And then against the bosses, we took 3 damage against Time Eater, actually in 8 turns. And 45 damage against Stony Deck in 5 turns. The deck's not incredible at dealing with bosses, for sure. Because dealing 80 damage with Whirlwind is really cool against something with 80 hit points, but a lot less cool against something with 480 hit points. But it had 80 max HP and like a Meat on the Bone and some Reapers and some Feel No Pains to get set up with eventually. Alright, this deck showcases like one of the most straightforward and broken things that Ironclad does with a little bit of spice to make it even more ridiculous. So Fiendfire Plus ×2 with Snecko Eye. This card just deals 60 damage to a single target. It's just really strong, because Snecko Eye is drawing you 2 extra cards, so it gets to exhaust 6 cards. It's just very, very, very strong. But this deck goes a little bit further. It has 2 copies of Juggernaut Plus. I've talked about Juggernaut already. This is an excellent power for just dealing a bunch of damage, even if you're not breaking it in any way. This deck is breaking it, because it's got the 2 copies of Juggernaut Plus, and it has a Feel No Pain with all of the Fiendfires. So now when I Fiendfire with 7 cards, 6 cards plus the Fiendfire, I'm going to be gaining 21 block from the Feel No Pain. As I gain the 21 block, I'm going to gain block 7 different times, which is going to proc Juggernaut 7 different times, which is going to give me another 49 damage to random enemies on top of what the Fiendfire is doing already. If I have 2 Juggernauts in play and I Fiendfire with a Feel No Pain in play, I'm dealing an extra 98 random damage to different enemies. So this deck just deals an incredible amount of front-loaded damage with that combination of cards. I don't think I see anything particularly remarkable anywhere else in this deck. We've got 4 copies of Shrug It Off and 3 copies of True Grit Plus, which is sort of the standard for Ironclad block, I would say. Pretty good energy with the Art of War, Mummified Hand, and Velvet Choker able to help us play our stuff. But there's nothing like absolutely ridiculous going on in the deck other than this Juggernaut Fiendfire Feel No Pain thing that we're doing. And we've got the 2 Battle Trances as well to draw up to even more cards in hand to support those. Looks like we took 8 damage against Time Eater, 32 damage against Donu Deka. It's hard to care that much about some of these numbers, because if I'm on the final floor and they see that Donudeka can deal me 32 damage, but I will kill them, it's not like I'm gonna try to take a riskier line to take like 4 damage against them. Like I don't win the run more for doing that. So if in the final boss fight I like took 30 damage, rather than thinking, oh my god, it could have gone even worse and he could have taken 60 damage, more likely it's like, oh, if he was at low health, he could have probably played in a way where he wouldn't have taken any damage. But like he had 80 health, so he wasn't at low health. So instead of taking no damage, he just like played the Fiend Fire for 100 damage and took 30 that turn, whatever. Yeah, super strong Fiend Fire deck there. Alright, this deck has 27 relics. What happened with this deck? We took an early Whirlwind, a Reckless Charge for more damage, a Twin Strike for more damage. So this is a run where we didn't pick up a super great early damage card. Neither Whirlwind nor Reckless Charge deal that much extra damage, but a Twin Strike was like an extra common, and then a Thunderclap is an extra common. So we took a lot of early commons to try to get our damage up. Had to... Oh, okay. We got a Kettle Ball very early. So we were able to lift, and get that stacked to +3 strength in each fight straight away, and then a Vajra is +4 strength. So we're walking into every fight with +4 strength right at the start of the run with this deck. And yeah, that's super strong. Got an Ornamental Fan for attack spamming. Pantograph is an immensely strong relic in Ascension 20 because it procs for both of the boss combats at the end of the run, so you heal 50 HP overall for those 2 fights. Got a Toxic Egg to add a bunch of defensive cards to the deck. And then there are so many relics here, but none of them are that great, especially toward the end of a run. Duvudel's nice for a little bit of extra strength, but for the most part, this deck is playing pretty fair, despite the fact that it has 27 relics. Like, it's only got 1 Feel No Pain, it doesn't have like a Runic Pyramid, it doesn't have some ridiculous combo thing going on, it doesn't have a Corruption. This deck does not break the game that much. It just gets over the line with +5 starting strength, a Limit Break Plus, which is only going to get played like once per combat probably. We've got a Headbutt Plus, so maybe, but for the most part this is a 38 card deck. It's not something that can recur Limit Break a lot. It's just got +5 starting strength and some attacks which scale okay with strength, like a Sword Boomerang, like a Heavy Blade. Yeah. 4 copies of Shrug It Off Plus and a copy of True Grit Plus for defense, with a Feel No Pain Plus helping out as well. How do we do against the bosses here? I'm curious. Set at 37 and 55. Yeah, so this deck was, despite all its stuff, it was definitely struggling against the bosses. It was playing a pretty fair game, and it's just we got enough elites and stuff like that that we were able to just overwhelm with value out of these relics and cards. This is spicy. Why does this deck have 2 copies of Demon Form in it? Well, it's a like 5+ energy deck. It's got Gremlin Horn and Lantern, as well as 2 energy relics. And we have a Meat on the Bone for sustain. So I guess this deck gets through Act 2 by taking quite a lot of damage in hallway fights, probably. Yeah, we're like taking a ton of damage in all these fights. Less toward the end of the act for whatever reason. We're just taking lots and lots and lots and lots of damage in all of our fights, and resting a lot at the same time. We got a feed. Looks like we got the feed early enough to be picking up a lot of max HP, up to 114 at the end of the run. And we have 2 copies of Disarm Plus, which is actually a really, really big deal against Awakened One and Time Eater. We've fought Awakened One and Donudeka, so we didn't get as much value. But Disarm Plus is a ridiculous mitigation tool against both Awakened One and Time Eater. So that would have helped an awful lot in that fight. I don't know why this deck has 2 copies of Demon Form. Seems sort of bad. There's nothing incredibly strong that it like interacts with here, but I guess the deck is just like trying to stay alive. It has 5 copies of Shrug It Off. No Feel No Pain though. Just trying to stay alive and let the Demon Form scale up with a lot of energy. And probably the big thing that's letting this deck win is the fact that it has 5+ energy oddly smooth stone as well. It's able to play these Shrug-It-Offs and Pommel Strikes to very good effect just because it has so much energy every turn. Alright, well that's a run. Every card in this deck is upgraded. This run, I took Calling Bell over Runic Dome at the end of Act 1. This was a very remarkable Ascension 20 run. I've never done that before, but Runic Dome has a lot of trouble in some Ironclad runs, where you're fighting 3 or 2 Act 3 bosses, and Runic Dome's really bad against Time Eater. Runic Dome makes it so you cannot see the enemy's intent, which means that you don't know if Time Eater is like attacking you for 40 plus or doing no attacks on you in a turn, which means that you're wasting a lot of energy in that fight, especially as Ironclad. Ironclad is often choosing whether to block or attack, and choosing that begrudgingly. Like, a Silent deck might often deploy powers and then just block a ton and play like Blurs, and Silent doesn't care that much whether it gets attacked or not in a turn, because it just doesn't maybe have all that many cards that do anything other than block anyway. Ironclad very regularly has very many cards which do not block and do attack, which it would like to play if it knows that it's not getting attacked. So looking at this run at the end of Act 1, I had a Frozen Egg and a Toxic Egg, so I knew that my cards were going to be very high quality. I believe I already had some very high quality cards. I already had a Battle Trance, a Rampage, a Combust Plus, Clothesline, Shrug-It-Off Plus. Oh, and a Fiendfire as well. Yeah, so with the Fiendfire and the Battle Trance, that's enough to get through Act 2 on 3 energy pretty easily. I've talked quite a lot about how ridiculous Fiendfire is. And so I went ahead and went for the Calling Bell with Darkstone Periapt as well, so it was giving plus 18 max HP. And Calling Bell gave us Calipers, Ornamental Fan, Tiny Chest, which is not incredible, but it also got us closer to the Dead Branch that we picked up after we got through Act 2. We were able to fight the Bronze Automaton with our deck without too much trouble, I believe. Like, we took 56 damage, but we had 99 max HP, so no big deal. Having Necronomicon, this is usually a pretty ridiculous relic, very good with Whirlwind in Ironclad especially. It combos with Dead Branch and Fiendfire, so you play Fiendfire, it exhausts all the cards in your hand, they are replaced with new cards by Dead Branch, and then the Fiendfire plays again because of the Necronomicon. And so you're looking at a card all of a sudden that's dealing 100 plus damage with one play. Every card in the deck is upgraded because we had the early Frozen Egg and Toxic Egg, so it's just very, very, very high value cards. We've got the Rupture, Brutality, Combust combination that we had earlier on. We were looking at this one, like build your own demon form. We've got that going on again. Some Shrugs and True Grits for block, Feel No Pain for block as well. We actually have the Juggernaut, Fiendfire, Feel No Pain combination here as well. And a Limit Break Plus, which, even though the deck has 34 cards, I think Limit Break Plus actually recurs quite a lot more often than you might think in this deck, because we've got Fiendfire to clear out the cards, we've got Brutality to draw more cards, the Shrugs are drawing more cards. So yeah, this is a pretty sweet deck. Took quite a few elites toward the end of the run with late Wing Boots pickup. And then we took an 85 damage against Awakened One and 53 damage against Time Eater. But our deck is, like, it has 106 max HP, largely because of this Darkstone Periapt pickup, and it was able to win from there. Also has the meat on the bone, so that we got some good healing after taking so much damage against Awakened One. So I guess the deck has quite a bit of trouble blocking, but hey, there you go. Alright, far fewer cards upgraded in this deck. This deck has a Snecko Eye in it. It actually doesn't have a Fiendfire. I think it's the first time we've seen a Snecko deck which didn't have a Fiendfire. It has a lot of very strong higher cost cards like Bludgeon, Demon Form Plus, Immolate Plus, Impervious Juggernaut. These are all very high impact, high cost cards, which are just great with Snecko Eye, Flame Barrier as well. Snecko Eye is just a relic which is strong enough that you can do things which look pretty fair and win the run because you have it. and that's what this deck looks like it did. Let's look at how we added things in Flame, Uppercut, Ghostly Armor, Flame Barrier, Shrug It Off, Anger. Got an early Anger in there. Anger is a great early pickup a lot of the time when you're picking up cards which cost a lot through Act 1. It just lets you play an extra 6 damage on a lot of your turns, which you wouldn't get otherwise, and that damage really adds up early in the game. Got an Immolate on floor 11, so that's the point where we have Immolate, and once you have Immolate, you can start thinking about really beating up Act 2. This is one of the strongest cards in Ironclad's pool for the first, like, 2/3 of a run. The numbers are just right on this card for it to be very strong, and all the fights up to Act 3, basically. And yeah, once you get Immolate, you can start to think about really going places with a run. So we fought 3. Looks like we fought 3 Act 2 elites. We fought Book of Stabbing twice with this deck. It's pretty ridiculous. But for the most part, this is just a Snecko deck. Okay. This deck's got 5 energy. We took a Coffee Dripper at the end of Act 2. Can no longer rest at rest sites. So that expresses quite a lot of confidence in our Reaper, but like this is a Limit Break Reaper deck. This is the first really ridiculous Limit Break deck that we've seen. It's also the first deck that's had Corruption. I don't know why I went such a long time before seeing a deck with Corruption, because this card is ridiculous, but you do need somewhat specific circumstances for it to matter. This deck ends up being able to take Coffee Dripper because it has Magic Flower for 50% better healing, Blood Vial for more healing, the Burning Blood, of course, is more healing. So just off those, we're healing 12 HP per fight, and then also Reaper with 2 copies of Limit Break. Those get us a lot more healing on top. 2 spot weakness pluses to get some stuff going. This deck can stall out fights somewhat reasonably with the 2 copies of Feel No Pain Plus and the Corruption. You can make an immense amount of block for quite a while to make sure that it gets some limit breaks off in the Reaper played. Obviously, if you play Corruption, you're only getting to play your limit breaks one more time because you're exhausting them when you play them. But that's sort of okay. This deck I deliberately didn't upgrade both limit breaks because there just wasn't actually a need to have them both upgraded. I just didn't need to play 4 limit breaks in a fight. Playing 3 was going to be fine. And with 2 copies of Feel No Pain, you actually benefit from your limit break being unupgraded because it exhausts and gains you 8 block, assuming that you already have the Feel No Pains in play. So just wanted to point that out. I think that it's easy to look at your limit break and sort of get overexcited and think you have to go to 999 strength, but you really don't. You have to go to like 20 strength against the Act 3 bosses, and past that you're not getting much value. By the time you're at 20 strength, you might as well just be playing attacks and killing them rather than spending more energy playing more limit breaks usually. And so you don't really have to spend another upgrade on an extra limit break. Uppercut. Super early Feel No Pain. Feel No Pain's an okay pickup early because it's so good in the Tri-Sentries fight and so good in the later game. So even though you only have 1 card that interacts with Feel No Pain, still pretty okay to take that on floor 2. Twin Strike for some more damage, upgrade Uppercut and Twin Strike. Oh wow, we fought a Gremlin Knob in the middle there at the Dead Adventure event and got an Anger as well. Talked about Anger just before. Lagavulin for Flame Barrier, Gremlin Knob, skipping some cards, and got another Feel No Pain on floor 11 and then a Reaper on floor 14. So this deck was like pretty set to go other than the limit breaks and spot weaknesses, which we managed to get going after the boss fight there. Cool. The Ironclad, Victory Ascension level 20. This deck has 3 copies of Spot Weakness and a Runic Dome. I believe I remember playing this deck, and I believe that I took Runic Dome without a Spot Weakness in the deck yet. Is that correct? This one was Wild Strike, Flame Barrier, Thunderclap, Skip, Clothesline, Uppercut, Bludgeon. It took a while for us to get the damage, but once we have Bludgeon, we're like finally there. Feed and Runic Dome. So yeah, I didn't have any copies of Spot Weakness in the deck yet. Spot weakness requires you to know that an enemy is attacking you to reliably gain 4 strength, but I'm pretty sure that I just only missed 1 spot weakness for the entire run, despite regularly targeting things which might be attacking me. You get to a point where you know which thing is most likely to be attacking you based on their AI patterns, but you never get to a point where you know for sure that things are attacking you because the AI patterns are somewhat random. So I just got very lucky with the spot weaknesses in this deck. This deck has 2 copies of Evolve Plus. It doesn't actually have that many ways to put a ton of burns or anything in the deck. It's got 2 copies of Wild Strike, I guess. This is just like a pretty good draw engine though, because all of the X3 bosses put statuses in your deck. Nemesis and the 2 Orbwalkers in Act 3 put statuses in your deck. The Book of Stabbing and the 3 Slavers fight puts statuses in your deck. So you don't have to be the one putting statuses in your deck for Evolve to be a pretty decent card, really. This one had a Mummified Hand, which helps make a power less painful to play, especially a power which draws cards. Mummified Hand really gives you a lot of mileage for being a deck which draws a lot of cards and plays them in their powers, because you end up like drawing 7 card hands and being able to play all of the cards in them. Picked up a Thread and Needle as well, and oddly smooth stone that makes our ability to make block in a fair way considerably stronger. And so this deck didn't have a Feel No Pain, but with stuff like Flame Barrier Plus, a Shrogodoff Plus, a True Grip Plus, a couple of Iron Waves, I guess, the deck's pretty good at weakening things, and it has a Disarm Plus, which is excellent as well. That was enough to get there. This deck, actually, I do remember playing it through Act 3, and it was having a lot of trouble creating consistent block, but did get the Apparition event. And Apparition's a really interesting event, because this is one of the strongest cards in the game, Apparition. And at Ascension 20 especially, I think I have basically a 100% take rate on the Apparition event. It costs you half of your max HP, but gives you 5 Apparitions. And at like Ascension 15 even, Intangible's not that relevant, because you can regularly block for how much damage enemies are dealing to you. But at Ascension 20, it's really unlikely that you end up with a deck which can block for how much damage you're taking every turn, because you're taking like an extra like 5-10 plus damage every turn from the extra difficulty. And so being able to go intangible becomes even more important, because turning 50 incoming damage into 1 incoming damage is more good than putting 40 incoming damage into 1 incoming damage. And often when you take Apparition event, you end up with a deck which can be intangible for 5 turns, and that's cool, but you have to either have killed the enemies by the end of 5 turns, or worked out some way to actually block by the end of 5 turns, or else you're just going to die at the end of 5 turns. So generally, if you're only having to pay 5 energy to block fully for 5 turns, you're going to be able to kill like hallway fights and even Act 3 elite fights in 5 turns, and that'll be fine. But then you'll end up at the boss fight and you might die. So how this deck ended up blocking enough to survive these boss fights, we perfected Donu Deka in 7 turns and took 9 damage from Tiny Eater in 9 turns. Was that I bottled a Barricade. Despite the deck having almost no block cards in it, I took a Barricade quite late in the run, right? I'm pretty sure I took Barricade pretty late. Upgraded Juggernaut. Purchased Barricade at a merchant. I actually bought it. I actually bought Barricade in a deck which basically had no block cards. And I think a lot of the time that people talk to me about Barricade, it's like a Barricade deck. And they're like, this Barricade deck is going to make 999 block or something and then play a Body Slam. And that is such an unusual way to actually use Barricade in Ascension 20. And it's sort of a useless way to use Barricade, honestly. If your deck is able to make enough block to block enemies' attacks every turn, Barricade doesn't do that much. Where Barricade has immense value is if your deck is unable to block the enemy's big attacks, but can make excess block in the turns where the enemy makes small attacks. If the enemy attacks you for 10 sometimes and 50 other times, and you can make 30 block every turn, Barricade's a really good card. If the enemy attacks you for 10 sometimes and 50 sometimes, and you can make 50 block a turn, Barricade's irrelevant, actually. So the other place that Barricade's good is if you cannot control how much block you make every turn. And that's sort of what's going on in this deck. It's like a confluence of both. Early on in the fight, I have 5 apparitions, so I don't have to like make a ton of block or anything every turn. It's irrelevant. And the enemy's attacking me for 1 every turn because of how apparition works. But I can play Barricade on turn 1. I can make like 10 to 30 damage every turn for the first 5 turns of the fight, maybe. And then, by the time that I run out of apparitions, I'm going to have 60 plus block stashed, and that's going to get me through the rest of the fight until the enemy is dead. And I think that's basically exactly what I remember happening in this fight. There's no body slam in there, is there? But yeah, we took 0 damage against Donu Deka in that way. And then Time Eater, I believe this 9 damage that Time Eater dealt us, it doesn't look very scary, right? But I'm pretty sure that we had like 80 block or something stashed on turn 6, and then by the end of turn 9, we had like 3 block stashed. So the Barricade's actually really important in the fact that we took 9 damage instead of like 80 damage, and if the fight went 3 turns longer, we very well may have taken something like 80 damage in this deck. It's just a cool use of Barricade. All right, this is the first really ridiculously broken exhaust synergy deck. So there are multiple decks which do this in this pool of runs, and it's a very, very, very strong thing to do. And it's like sort of the premier extension of your exhaust synergies for Ironclad. Dark Embrace draws you a card whenever you exhaust a card. Corruption makes it so all of your skills auto-exhaust. Feel No Pain makes it so you're gaining block for playing these skills. And then you Body Slam. And it's like a super, 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 super broken way to deal a ton of damage with Ironclad. And so how this deck functions is it just like moseys along through the fight. It starts deploying powers. It tries to survive for a while. It's got a couple of imperviouses to block for big turns. It's got an offering to speed it up. This deck actually got 5 copies of Disarm, which is ridiculous. Disarm is one of the strongest Ironclad cards for the boss fights, although these cards are sort of irrelevant for what the deck actually does that's strong. So yeah, we have 5 copies of Disarm, but you'll see other instances of this combination of cards working together where we don't have 5 Disarms and they're just as strong. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the deck's going to suddenly have Corruption and Dark Embrace in play with some Feel No Pains, and you can just win with that turn quite often, or maybe the next turn, but you're gonna all of a sudden like play all of your Imperviouses and Disarms and your Armaments and your True Grit, and you're gonna be drawing a ton of cards as you do so, and you're gonna be making a ton of block, and then you play your Entrench for double your block, and at this point you have like 120, 150 block on the turn, and you play your 2 Body Slams, and that kills any enemy in the game, pretty much. You have to make sure you can do that twice against Awakened One. You have to make sure that you actually have enough damage against Donu Deka, but it's basically going to be fine to delay for a turn. And we have a Pommel Strike Plus as well in this deck. Any sort of like Pommel Strike Plus or anything like that is going to let you play 2 Body Slams. Once you've drawn your entire deck, you can play your 2 Body Slams, then play your Pommel Strike Plus, draw your 2 Body Slams again, and play them again. So I'm pretty sure this deck is like able to deal 1,000 plus damage to Giant Head with the first Body Slam, and then it like can play 3 more, and it has a Pen Nib, so it's pretty easy for this combination of cards to be dealing like 10,000 damage in 1 turn against Giant Head. But Giant Head multiplies damage for you playing more cards. More reasonable would be like only 2,000 damage in 1 turn, which does kill any enemy in the game. Notice that this deck doesn't have a Barricade. The last deck did have a Barricade. This deck doesn't. Barricade's not that strong in this deck. It doesn't need Barricade. It makes all of its block at the end of the fight and ends the fight that turn. So, going back to the idea that, like, challenging the premise that Barricade is good in a deck that makes a lot of block, because that's just not actually where Barricade's good. and so wanted to reiterate that looking at this list. Looking at the like early damage cards we took in Armaments, Rampage, Disarm, Body Slam. That's really interesting. Taking early Body Slams on an Ironclad is really, really interesting because they're not that great early, but having Body Slams in your deck just changes how you evaluate cards so massively. Did we fight against Gremlin Knob at all? We took an Impervious off Lagavulin, so we already had a Body Slam, upgraded Armaments, and Impervious. This is a very different looking floor 7 Ironclad deck from what I often have. Looks like we didn't have to fight a Gremlin Knob, although by the time we have Impervious Body Slam, we're probably fine against Gremlin Knob. I don't think the relics are very relevant at all here. I guess worth noting that we went through Act 2 with only 3 energy. But for the most part, we're just playing our super broken stuff. I also, I guess, don't know where we actually got this set up. Because the deck does have some trouble winning before it gets the Corruption set up. Looks like on floor 28 we bought a Corruption, and at that point we're probably pretty set. Took 16 damage against Awaken 1 over 11 turns, 16 damage against Time Eater over 7 turns. So just takes a while to get the powers going, and then the deck goes off. Actually, against Awaken 1, because there are 2 phases, I would have deliberately played the start of it slow. Because keep in mind we have 5 copies of Disarm, so neither of these enemies can actually deal damage to us ever. Just allowed them to deal a little bit of damage while we set up. This deck is another Corruption Plus deck. I decided to meme a little bit with this run because I got a Dead Branch and Corruption. And, like, at that point, I'm not sure what there is to say. This is, like, the strongest combination in the game. Skills cost 0 whenever you play a skill, exhaust it. Dead Branch, whenever you exhaust a card, add a random card to your hand. So, whenever you play your Corruption skill and get another skill, you're just chaining skills at no cost. We also had an Ice Cream, so we can conserve energy while we're doing this ridiculous stuff. Some of these cards are in here because they're really good with Dead Branch specifically. It's important to react to the relics you have appropriately. So Ice Cream is not a great reason to take Seeing Red in your deck. It's cool that you keep the energy from Seeing Red until next turn, but that didn't actually increase your output in this turn. I would not recommend taking a bunch of Seeing Reds because of Ice Cream. Dead Branch is an incredible reason to have a Seeing Red in your deck, because Dead Branch ensures that we have tons and tons of cards to play, and it means that Seeing Red's energy is always going to be useful straight away, pretty much every single time. But yeah, this is like a Dead Branch Corruption deck, which also has 5 apparitions, so it's absolutely ridiculous. 0 damage 5 turns for both of the Act 3 bosses. Not super surprising. This deck's got my highest score ever. 2556 is my highest ever score in this game, I believe. What's going on here? This is a pretty light on relics sort of run. Pommel Strike, Carnage, Anger. Got a good amount of early game damage there. Managed to beat a Gremlin Knob, beat Sentries. Got an Offering. Got a Feed. And a Velvet Choker. This looked like a super fair deck. We did get Snecko Eye, I guess, at the end of Act 2, so that's working with Bludgeon, and again with Fiend Fire. Good to make things a little bit stronger, but this deck's pretty fair. Even so, the Disarm Plus is very useful against Act 3 bosses. I imagine this deck took quite a lot of damage against Act 3 bosses and probably just squeaked through 30 damage against Donu Deka, 130 damage against Time Eater. So against Time Eater, we had to use Reaper to stay alive. We got a spot weakness for strength scaling. Jeez. Pretty rough fight. If I remember right, I dual wielded a bunch of copies of Reaper in that Time Eater fight. I think dual wield was a super late addition. Yeah, floor 47. Dual Wield is a card which does not have a ton of value in most Ironclad decks. However, it can be quite good with Snecko Eye, because getting like a 0-cost Bludgeon just gets even better if you get 2 of them. So you have tactical reasons to copy a lot of things with Dual Wield with Snecko Eye, because they cost 0 this turn and you want to play them this turn. And also because you draw 7 cards a turn, you're more likely to draw this card in the same hand as something that you'd really like to copy, like Reaper. in this deck is, I think, the only one that's great. But man, is it good to copy a Reaper. So I was looking at this run going into the final fight, and it was like, yeah, this deck is not probably good enough to survive against some of the Act 3 bosses and the ways that those fights can play out. And dual wield was an excellent option to just go together with which things were strong in this deck, mainly having Reaper and Snecko to push the deck over the top. I think we lose this run without picking up dual wield, and dual wield is not a strong card. That would be near the bottom of like a tier list for Ironclad cards. So it's really important to detach yourself from like abstractly evaluating cards and just looking at what your deck does, what its strengths are, how good it can do against the fights that it has to fight, and think about, are there cards which wouldn't usually be that great, which can help my deck in this situation? And for this run, I think dual wield, I wouldn't call it like the MVP of this run at all. The MVP of this run is Snecko and like Fiendfire and Reaper and Bludgeon Plus for sure, and Feed, because we had 97 HP in the final fight. That's another reason why we won it. But dual wield is like a standout performer in this run, where dual wield is not usually a very good card. Okay, this is another corruption deck. It's it's a different sort of broken for corruption, this deck. This deck doesn't have the Dark Embrace Feel No Pain stuff going on with corruption. In fact, if you look at this deck without looking at the relics, it doesn't look like corruption's very good in this deck at all. Exhausting our skills does not actually do very much for us. This deck has Shron's Ashes though. Whenever you exhaust a card, deal 3 damage to all enemies. So oh, it also has Snecko. So in this deck, corruption's like an energy plus damage card rather than being a real combo piece. Corruption's skills cost 0, that overrides Snecko. So you're going to be drawing 7 cards a turn, and you'll have a deck where like defends are going to cost you 3 sometimes, because that's what Snecko does, and that's the downside of Snecko. But when you play corruption, all of your defense that you drew that turn cost you 0. Instead, all of your skills always cost you 0, so it massively improves your output. And then Chiron's Ashes, whenever you exhaust a card, deal 3 damage to all enemies. That's going to be enough to get through most of the fights in the game before like giant head and Act 3 bosses. There's just an immense amount of damage coming out of the skills in the deck. This deck got a Nilry's Codex as well, so we're able to fill up more skills for our deck with corruption. A lot of people, when I'm streaming, they will talk about how a certain card can give us guaranteed infinite fuel for True Grit or something, and usually I don't care at all. Like, usually your deck doesn't need more fuel to exhaust cards, but this is a deck where actually that's a real relevant thing. Adding more skills which block to this particular deck. This deck is using those skills which block to stay alive in fights and also to output damage with corruption. And so, yeah, Nilry's was actually very relevant for just like adding ghostly armors to our deck in this one. We also got the Apparition event, always super strong, lets us set up, and then we have like a Snecko plus a Demon Form plus, trying to remember what we bottled. Where did we pick up the bottle? Before the Act 1 boss. Obtained Bottled Tornado. I don't think I had a Demon Form yet. Well, anyway, we do have a Demon Form in the deck, right? But it looks like we didn't bottle it. I may not have had a power in the deck yet when I bottled, actually. It might just be an empty bottle. Well, that would have been unfortunate. Oh, no, I had an Inflame. So we had a Bottled Inflame for +3 strength early. Anyway, just a like pretty fair deck. Which sort of pushed the envelope with corruption, and then the Snecko for Bludgeon and Demon Form and the Apparitions. There was actually nothing fair about this deck. I don't know why I said that this deck was fair. Not a super fair deck, actually. Alright, got a Pantograph, Shuriken, 4 energy with Snecko is pretty much why this deck won, I would say. Has an Apotheosis. Apotheosis is a bit of a hit and miss card, but when you didn't get many of your upgrades throughout the course of a run, because this deck is struggling, like, everywhere. It's not able to rest and upgrade, or it's not able to go to campfires and upgrade all that much. When you have Snecko Eye, the fact that you draw 2 more cards every turn means that you see this on an earlier average turn in your fight, and it, on average, costs less than 2, so it makes it a much, much better card. I honestly, I think that this deck probably loses a decent amount of its Act 3 boss fights. It's got enough value to get there just barely, with like the Reaper plus a little bit of strength gain going on. We've got our Rupture Brutality, although we didn't get Combust this time, so our Make Your Own Demon form is only halfway effective. Yeah, it's like, it's just barely there. I legitimately think this deck loses to the Act 3 boss fight a decent amount of the time. So we took 47 damage against Awakened One, 35 against Time Eater. I had 137 hit points, apparently. When did I get my feed? Okay, so having 137 hit points certainly helps. Feed can really run away with runs sometimes. It's easy to undervalue this card, but this card's not that bad to have in your deck, just like always. 10 damage for 1 energy, which exhausts. You've got all sorts of exhaust synergies in Ironclad. Not really any of them here, but in general you can. And 10 damage isn't that bad for 1 energy. If feed goes off like 3+ times in terms of raising your max HP, you start to get to a point where you're playing runs an entirely different way because your max HP is so high. And this deck, despite not having that much strong stuff, like, yeah, had 137 max HP. Whatever. Act 3 bosses are not going to deal that much damage to a deck which has, like, Shuriken, Snecko Eye, 4 energy. Has a Pantograph as well, so, like, Awakened One dealt 47 damage to us, but we ended the fight on 116 health out of 137 because of the Pantograph healing. Well, that's at the start of fight. No, never mind. We actually ended the fight and went into the Time Eater fight with 137 out of 137 HP. Just an immense amount of health and sustain. Self-Forming Clay is here as well. I guess shout out to Self-Forming Clay, which is very, very strong with Brutality and Rupture. If I remember right, I took Rupture before having Brutality in the deck. In this run. I think I took it fairly early on with like nothing that turned it on at all. I think I took it in Act 2. Disarm, yeah, Rupture on floor 21. I took this card like halfway through Act 2 with nothing that interacted with it yet, because with no other strength scaling in the deck yet, I believe I already had a Reaper, or maybe I didn't. He said a Shuriken. I had a Self-Forming Clay, and I just assumed that any self-damage card that I saw was going to be well worth adding to this deck. You can do that, I don't know. It's okay. It was okay in that spot. It wasn't incredible, but it was okay. This deck's absolutely ridiculous. Breaking into runs that I played very recently now. This run's from yesterday. So this run has 5 apparitions. It has a Strange Spoon, which I bought at a store. Cards which exhaust when played will instead discard 50% of the time. With Strange Spoon, our 5 apparitions go from giving us 5 turns of intangible to an average of 10 turns of intangible. I also have an Instance Burner. Every 6 turns I gain an intangible. So on average, this deck is intangible for the first 12 turns of the fight. and the rest of the cards don't matter, basically. It's going to be really hard for a deck which is intangible for 12 turns on average to lose. Took us 8 turns to kill Donu Deka. Took us 9 turns to kill Time Eater. These numbers are lower than 12, so probably did not spend any turns in either of those fights not being intangible. Didn't spend a lot of time on less than full health in this run. Just look at the early cards. Body Slam. Ooh, Body Slam over Headbutt, Thunderclap. What was my whale bonus? That's spicy. I've been talking a bit about Body Slam tonight, and I really do think it's a very, very strong Ironclad card on Ascension 20. Just the upsides on it are amazing. Oh, maybe it's because I didn't have an elite fight particularly early. Yeah, I think that if I have an elite fight like on floor 7, I probably do not take Body Slam here. But we had a left time in the act before an elite that I felt like we could do it. Then took a Carnage from floor 2, and a Headbutt, and a Battle Trance. Yeah, this deck gets very strong very early. Headbutt plus Battle Trance is just incredible because you can play the Battle Trance, and then on average your deck's small enough you will have drawn Headbutt in that hand most of the time after you've played the Battle Trance, and then you play the Headbutt to put the Battle Trance back on top, and all of a sudden you're drawing 7 cards a turn instead of 5 as Ironclad. Well, 8, but one of them is Battle Trance, so 7 effective, useful cards. Got a Fiendfire very early as well. Fiendfire with Battle Trance, very strong. So this deck took off really, really fast and then just became absolutely revolting with the addition of the apparitions. And then this is my most recent Ironclad win. This one was only 12 hours ago, it looks like. And this is another one of the Corruption, Dark Embrace, Feel No Pain things with Body Slam. This deck actually has a bit of extra spice. This deck is like maybe even one step further in terms of ridiculous exhaust energies, because this deck has a Sundial Infinite in it. Every 3 times you shuffle your draw pile, gain 2 energy. For some reason, with how the game is coded, a Pommel Strike plus, if you have no cards left in your draw pile when you play it, this will count as 2 shuffles. So we have 2 of these. So how this deck works is that we have Corruption, Runic Pyramid actually to hold the relevant cards in hand until when we want to go off. But we've got Corruption plus Dark Embrace plus Feel No Pain to just exhaust a ton and make tons and tons of block. We've got 2 copies of Impervious plus an Entrench. And then we have 2 Body Slams. So we can do that to deal 1,000 damage in a turn. And then if for some reason, like that we're fighting Awakened one, for example, we still need to do something else after that. We also have 2 Pommel Strikes. Once all of our skills are upgraded, we get to a point where we can have every card in our deck in our hand. We have Runic Pyramid, so we can start the turn with 8 cards in our hand. We didn't have to discard our hand last turn. And then we can just play the Pommel Strikes over and over again, and each one will draw the other one. Every 4 of them that we play, we get... Every 3 of them that we play, we get 4 energy. There you go. So playing 3 of them only costs 3 energy and makes us 4 energy off of Sundial. I bought a Panache, I think. Or I took a Panache from the event that gives you colorless cards. It was like sort of okay. It helped deal a little bit of AoE damage to Act 3 hallway fights and stuff, but not super relevant. Yeah, this deck's super bonkers, just with the strength of the Corruption, Dark Embrace, Feel No Pain, and Trench and Body Slams sort of thing that it has going on. Took an early Impervious in this run too, if I remember right. Battle Trance, Exhume, Dark Embrace. Or not Impervious, Immolate was what I was trying to say. Is that from the boss fight? Impervious? Okay, I don't know where I got the Immolate from, actually. This was a run that developed sort of interestingly. Took the Anger super early. I think the pick that's sort of notable... Okay, taking Havoc is sort of interesting on floor 3. If I think that I can upgrade Havoc, I'm usually pretty happy to have it early on in the run. And having taken an Anger and an Armaments, I felt like even if I didn't get it upgraded, I was probably going to be going Armaments Plus fairly early on with an early Armaments. But the really interesting one here is probably Dark Embrace on floor 8. So just angling toward that sort of exhaust synergy very early on, because the exhaust synergy is such a strong thing that Ironclad can do. I don't think I would recommend taking Dark Embrace on floor 8 here with only a Havoc in the deck as a card that interacted with it. On Ascension 15, I don't think the payoff is as necessary, but on Ascension 20, the payoff does matter quite a bit more because it's a lot harder to win with just a fair deck. Sorry, I just mashed my microphone. 0 damage 4 turns against Donu Deka. 24 damage 5 turns against Awakened one. So we got hit once. Ouch. Yeah, so that took an hour. Just looked at... that's all of the Ascension 20 Ironclad wins that I've had since the mode came out. I think overall I have like a 40% win rate, 30 to 40% win rate on Ironclad. It's my lowest win rate, but I haven't played enough runs on any of the classes to care that much about win rate yet. Overall, in the last like 3 weeks, I've been winning a little bit more than half of my runs across the 3 classes, and having only played like 30 to 40 runs total, I think, on each class, it's still in the range where like a couple of runs where I got unlucky or particularly lucky can shift the percentage by like 10% or yeah, something like that, 8% or something. 8% for having 2 runs that should have been wins turn into losses by me making one mistake or me getting particularly unlucky on one turn or something like that. So it's still at a point where the percentage doesn't matter all that much. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, enjoyed looking at these Ironclad decks. This is a very different approach to talking about deck construction from like a guide video or a tier list or a breakdown of archetypes or something. I've just been trying to focus very, very directly on what a deck does that makes it strong. It's not about archetypes. I tried to show you, like, especially in the latter half of the video when I realized it was a good idea, I tried to show you that on the first floors, like, every single one of these decks is basically trying to pick up some damage and trying to put together some coherent strategy for killing hallway fights. It's not like I sat down and was like, alright, I'm gonna build an exhaust deck, or alright, I'm gonna build a strength deck, or something like that. And while you got to see that, like, I had several exhaust decks that came together, you also got to see there were some ridiculous apparition things that happened, there were some limit break Reaper things that happened, there was that deck with Reaper where I took a dual wield just so that I could play Reaper more often. That's something that it would be impossible for me to show you in like a guide video or somewhere where I talk about archetypes. I hate thinking about archetypes in this game because I just think it removes the focus from the problem-solving aspect of runs, where you have to work out in the moment, this combination of relics and cards does this particular thing strong, which might let me beat the fights I have to beat, and working out which cards you can draft to support doing that thing, or which relics you can buy or whatever. So I think the dual wield example is really good, and then hopefully there are like patterns of cards that work together very well, which we saw a number of times. So the exhaust synergy stuff, the corruption plus body slam stuff, big ups to Disarm for just being an incredible card on its own for all the Act 3 boss fights. I don't remember saying big ups anytime in the last 10 years. Hopefully people still know what that means. We saw a little bit of strength scaling. We got to see Barricade applied to one of the decks which was actually the weakest at creating block in all of the run pool, rather than being a card which went into... Like, this is another deck where people were like, hey, Barricade would be really good here. And it's like, no, doesn't actually do anything. Wouldn't actually really be relevant at all, but we got to see a run where I had a deck which couldn't make much block, where I was really excited to have a Barricade in the deck. Yeah. Oh, lots of interactions with like Snecko-Eye and Fiendfire, and the Juggernaut Feel No Pain Fiendfire combination of cards, which is strong enough to be worth pointing out as just 3 cards which go together so well and break the game in such an astounding way that you want to be looking out for those for sure. And then some interesting relic interactions, I would say, although I think Ironclad might have the fewest relic interactions in terms of why decks become strong for Ironclad. Ironclad has a lot of card interactions where the strongest things that you're doing are because you have 2, 3, 4 cards which interact together in such a powerful way that they sort of completely break the game. I don't think that Silent has that quite as much. I can think of one combination of Silent cards that does that. Yeah, I guess Silent sort of has that. But I feel like Silent's decks interact a bit more with relics, and even Defects decks might as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed this look at my Ironclad wins. I'm going to record videos on my Sign and Defect ones now, so those will be up the next day and the day after that. See ya next time. Bye.